What's up, everybody? Welcome to my Dreamcast review project. My name is Jagneaux, aka the Jaggernaut. I am here to collect, play, and review every single Sega Dreamcast game released in North America over the console's lifespan. I'll be playing these games on original hardware using authentic disc copies. So join me as I dive into this library of wonderful games as we see what makes the Dreamcast so special and beloved even to this day. Game number 2 in my series is Airforce Delta from Konami for the Sega Dreamcast. This is a flight combat game similar in style and design to Ace Combat rather than a flight simulation game like Arrow Wings was in the first game in our series. So we're going to dive into this game, check it out, see what it's all about, see if it's fun, see if it's worth playing, and see if I would recommend it for your Sega Dreamcast. First and foremost, I want to kind of clear the air and set the record straight here a little bit with Airforce Delta, because if you look back at the reviews at the time of its release, which I'll throw up on screen right now, some averages from Game Rankings, you can see for yourself it doesn't have a tremendous reputation, but the review scores weren't bad. You know, places like IGN and GameSpot and some other places gave it 7, 8 out of 10. And nowadays, if you look back at most coverage of this game that I've seen, there's sort of this revisionist history in the retro gaming community. I'm sure you know about it. If you look back, think fondly of a game you played, think fondly of a system you owned as a kid growing up, and now go look at what people say about it today. And there's this sort of collective consciousness that if a popular content creator or if a popular personality out there decides they don't like something, that becomes the narrative around the game and around the platform. It happens with things like the Nintendo 64, the Nintendo GameCube, the Sega Saturn. To some degree, the Genesis, people forget the Genesis was actually outselling the Super Nintendo for a couple of years in America. The Sega Dreamcast sort of has this cult following and people act like it was a huge, massive failure at the time of its existence, but in reality, it was actually quite popular. It failed for a lot of other reasons. But yeah, we look at games like Airforce Delta, and it was compared heavily to Ace Combat 2 when it came out, and that is because Ace Combat 2 was a recent game, very popular, very well done, very successful, reviewed well, and Airforce Delta came out for the Dreamcast a couple of years later, so it was compared to it very directly, and that is totally fair. But now, looking back on it with some nostalgia and looking back on it with some reverence for the time period and some understanding of how design decisions and difficulties can arise during a game's development period, I think Airforce Delta deserves a little bit more credit than it's given in a lot of circles, because the game is actually really fun. It's a very solid flight combat game. This is a game that you can pick up and play for short periods of time, or you can really dig in, ramp up the difficulty, and try to complete these missions as quickly and efficiently as possible. And I think they've really nailed a gameplay loop and flow here that is just fantastic. I mean, it feels good to play, which is, the bare minimum for any video game, but this is a game that came out at launch for the Sega Dreamcast, and it was really good right out of the gate. And I think that is a testament to the quality of Konami's development here, and I feel like it should be praised a little bit. This is not a game that is going to rewrite your understanding of what it means to play a flight combat game. This is not a genre-defining entry into into the library. This is not a game that you're gonna talk about for years and years as like the greatest thing you've ever played. Obviously, it's none of those things, but I do think it's actually pretty fun. When it's time to queue up for a mission, you'll get a little briefing that goes over some of the narrative implications and context of the fictional geopolitical struggles going on around the region that the mission takes place in. For example, here on mission 3, you can see there is a supply base that I need to go attack and destroy and get rid of the different convoys around it. There's some great little animations that really make you feel like you're living out you're living out the actions of someone in a Top Gun movie, or something like that. I think they did a nice job of nailing that vibe and feel. From there, you're taken to your hangar where you can look at your different planes. You can also buy and sell planes as well, because other than the default plane, if you crash, the plane that you took into the mission is gone. You have to rebuy it. So you can sell planes to get more cash, or just complete missions over again to get cash. So you have to be a little careful. Only your default plane is infinite. All the other ones you can lose them if you end up crashing and destroying the aircraft. Something I really appreciated with Airforce Delta is that it seems to be designed with the typical gamer in mind. And what I mean by that is you're not expected to know how to fly a plane whenever you pick up the controller with this one. It really kind of caters to where you're at and meets you where you're at with your skill level, because most people that play these kind of games and most people that bought a Dreamcast at launch probably weren't very familiar with flight simulators, because I know I'm not and I wasn't. So this game was actually pretty playable. It wasn't complicated to use the different commands that you have available to you on your plane. You can switch targets very easily. You can launch your missiles. You can fire your gun, chase down different planes. The radar was easy to read and understand. All the different instruments on screen were a little overwhelming at first, but once you skim through the manual, you kind of get an understanding what the different numbers and bars and gauges mean. So it really wasn't that bad. The main thing that I think was a little difficult to wrap my brain around and kind of difficult to really dial in correctly was the way that the throttle worked, because while you're holding the accelerator, you can't really feather it and fine tune exactly where you want your throttle to land at. So instead you're kind of forced to sort of go almost full blast or almost downgraded to where you're going kind of slow. And so it was hard to get an in-between amount, which made turning quickly a little difficult, because you should be ideally at about 50% throttle whenever you're trying to bank and turn the plane. So it was hard to really get that exactly where I wanted it for some of those maneuvers. But overall, the planes were very easy to control, and I really did feel the difference whenever I would buy a better plane. There was a noticeable upgrade, so that was kind of nice. I really enjoyed the fact that whenever you finished a mission successfully, it would play a third-person sort of cinematic replay of everything you did on that mission. So this replay here is auto-generated, and it happens immediately after the mission is over. You don't have to do anything or select anything, or it's nothing complicated. It just auto-plays, and so the game is always recording everything you do. And you can see here that it just automatically chooses these camera angles to give it a cinematic look. And the end result is pretty cool. Like, it actually, seems to highlight the action well. It gives you a nice look of the actual entire level, so you can actually see your plane flying as well. Since the game is in first person, you don't get to see it during missions. So I thought this was a great touch. I'm not familiar with Ace Combat, so maybe this feature was ripped from there. I have no idea. One quick side note, Airforce Delta did get a downgraded demake port for the Game Boy Color later on. It's essentially the same game, but very different. Obviously, the gameplay is kind of a front-facing scroller type of format, kind of like Afterburner, I guess you could say, on the Genesis, or other kind of scrolling games. But it moves very slow, so it's a little strange. It doesn't have the speed and intensity that you expect, but it's neat. All the footage you've seen here was captured with me playing on my authentic, real Sega Dreamcast using the regular Dreamcast controller or my Retro Fighters controller. I do have a mission stick, flight stick, coming that I don't have yet, so whenever I receive that, I will give it a try, and I'll probably test out this game and Arrow Wings and other flight games to see how they play and how they feel. And I'll make a dedicated video on that stick and whether or not I think it's worth it. But just so you know that this footage was played with and captured with using a regular controller. And there you have it. That is Airforce Delta for the Sega Dreamcast, made by Konami. This game is pretty fun. I actually had a good time with it. I enjoyed it more than I expected to, and I feel like there is enough content here to make it worth a pickup if you are looking for a flight combat game on Dreamcast. You could do worse, and this game is pretty solid. The next game in my series will be game number 3, Blue Stinger, developed by Climax and published by Activision. It is an action-adventure game with survival horror inspirations from the likes of Resident Evil. It's a quirky game. It's a very Dreamcast vibey game, very quirky, late 90s, early 2000s type game. Thank you very much for watching my review of Airforce Delta on Sega Dreamcast. Hit that subscribe and like button if you enjoyed the video, and make sure and leave a comment down below of what your favorite Dreamcast games are, and hopefully I get to them sooner rather than later. I am reviewing every Dreamcast game in order of release, so it is going to take me a little while, but I have better capture footage and better capture equipment now, so I should be able to get through these games a lot faster and move through the list. So thank you very much for tuning in, and I hope to see you again next time.